Hello everyone and welcome to this virtual site tour video. I'm Ben, one of the community archaeologists at DigVentures. Recently, with all the time I've been having indoors, it's been a chance to kind of reflect and look back, and I've been looking back at previous digs that I've done, and specifically back to my first one. So today I'm going to take you all on a virtual site tour of our first ever site at DigVentures and my favourite site, Flag Fen. Flag Fen is a really special and unique site because it's a 3,000-year-old Bronze Age site on the edge of a wetland environment, and that means the waterlogged conditions there have left an amazing level of preservation. The heart of the site is a wooden bridge or causeway that's over a kilometre long with a central platform, and it's still preserved in the ground today. For something that's thousands of years old, not only is that a really impressive construction, it's amazing that it survived in the condition that it has. Now, the Bronze Age in general is a really fascinating time period here in the UK. It lasted from about 4,500 to 2,800 years ago. Metal tools were starting to be developed, huge burial mounds or barrows were being constructed, and it was a time of huge social change with new styles of farming, settlement, and land management. It must have been a really interesting time to live. But Flag Fen isn't the only amazing site in the area. Just over a mile away is Must Farm, which has also been called Britain's Pompeii, because archaeologists found abandoned wooden houses with food still on the table and incredible things like balls of string preserved after 3,000 years. And Flag Fen, being just across the water, would have been part of the same landscape and community. So, I'm going to lead you on a virtual tour of Flag Fen, and along the way we're going to see some of the incredible finds, take a look at the wider landscape, and hear the story of how the DigVentures community came together to excavate and find out more about this incredible site. If you've got any questions, ask them in the comments and I'll do my best to get to them at the end. Are you ready? Let's go. So, who discovered Flag Fen and what did they find? Okay, so Flag Fen was first discovered in November 1982 by Francis Pryor, who was one of the Time Team archaeologists. The story goes he literally tripped over the site walking back from the pub.
Right, it was here. I was walking back to the pub in that direction, and I caught my foot on a large piece of wood. But when I picked up the piece of wood, I looked at it, and then when I spotted the axe marks at the tip, and they were about 1.5 inches wide, I knew they had to be Bronze Age, and I suddenly thought, what have we got here?
So, straight after that, the first excavation started taking place over the 80s and the 90s, and then a few digs happened in the early 2000s too. And Time Team also came here and did an episode as well. These excavations all led to some amazing discoveries. Things such as swords and daggers, and some of these looks like they were actually ritually deposited, because when they were found, some of them had intentional breaks on them and had actually been snapped on purpose and deposited in the ground. Other finds, including some shears, still in their original wooden box as well as one of the earliest wooden wheels ever found in Britain. So what and where is Flag Fen? So it turns out that Flag Fen is basically a huge Bronze Age wetland site dating from 1300 to 900 BC. That's about 3,300 to 2,900 years ago. It's located just east of Peterborough, on the edges of the fens, and nowadays the site is an archaeology park that you can visit. It has reconstructed roundhouses, an Iron Age one, a Bronze Age one. It has a museum, and it also has the really exciting and amazing preservation hall, where you can still see the original wood that was excavated, and it's still preserved there today. But what's even more exciting than all the swords and the daggers is this timber causeway and platform which crossed the wetland. What was the causeway linking and why? What was it really for? Why was it built? Was it built for settlement? Was it for practical use? Was it ritual? Or was it a bit of all of these? So in terms of what we know, a timber causeway is roughly 1 kilometre long and links two dry land areas together. Fengate, which is to the west, and Northey Island, which is to the east. Its position is quite fascinating because of the wetland environment. The sea levels rose in the early Bronze Age and started to cut these two areas of dry land off from each other. So, where the site is really helps our understanding of why it was there. But the wider landscape is important as well. So I previously mentioned Must Farm with its famous boats and preserved roundhouses. But either side of Flag Fen at Fengate and Northey are some of the earliest field systems in England, and a Bronze Age settlement has also been discovered at nearby Bradley Fen. So perhaps the causeway was linking two areas of settlement where people were living and farming, maybe. But why are these sites important? Well, it's the preservation. It gives us a glimpse into the lives of the Bronze Age people in a way that most dryland sites can't. It enables us to answer more questions about what they were doing, how they were living, what their society was like, and how they were able to build something like this. So it helps us to understand them better. But despite all these excavations, there's still plenty more left to find out about Flag Fen. By this point, only a very small portion had been excavated, and there was increasing evidence of a new and worrying problem. It was becoming clear that the survival of the site itself was under threat. So far, I've talked a bit about the background to our site, where it is, what it is, why it's important, but why in 2012 did DigVentures decide to do a dig at Flag Fen?
Flag Fen is a huge and incredibly well preserved site, but it's drying out. Partly because of climate change, partly because of modern development, but it's drying out. And as it dries, the timber's going to crack and basically turn to dust. And it would do that very quickly indeed. We reckon that the site has a maximum life of maybe 30 to 50 years. And that's why it's essential that we keep digging before the site dries out. It really is a matter of time.
Especially as archaeologists still hadn't found the full extent of the platform and the boundary area between the wet and the dry land parts of the site. And it's such an important site for understanding Britain's human and environmental past that we needed answers to these questions before it was too late. With that in mind, it became pretty urgent to carry out further excavation, and that's where DigVentures first came into the picture. Crowdfunding and crowdsourcing this dig was a hugely important part of the project and helped to make DigVentures what it is. This was not just a dig for the sake of digging, but to bring much wider social, economic and environmental benefits to the site, the local community and beyond. We wanted to see how archaeology done for and by the public could actually form a wider base for growth for the site, the community and the lives of the people involved. So, the Flag Fen Lives campaign was launched on the 29th of February 2012 at the DV launch party in a brewery in London. 90 days later, over £27,000 was raised by people wanting to be a part of the Flag Fen story, either on site or online, and I was one of those people. So, it was time to open our first ever trenches. The excavations themselves involved 2 trenches and 3 test pits. The trenches were located to try and assess the archaeology where the wet land meets the dry land, to try and find the causeway at that point, and to assess any remains and their levels of preservation. We also had 3 test pits to excavate. These would be targeted specifically to look at the preservation levels of the wood in the wetland environment. 2 test pits were located either side of the preservation hall, with a third to be located over the platform by an auger survey. So, day 1, the 23rd of July 2012, a DigVentures spade cut the ground for the first time ever, and our story started. Now our virtual site tour is really going to get into the juicy details. We're going to start with Trench 1. So this trench was located to the east of the preservation hall, on the suspected boundary edge between the wetland and the dry northy island. And it also took in a slither of a previous time team trench, and this was so that we could get a close comparison in preservation levels and what was left in the ground between what they had found and what we were going to find. So, as the first to be opened, our shiny new venturers were sent straight into Trench 1. Cleaning back for the first ever time on a DV site, they came down onto our first buried soil layer. Now, buried soil is pretty much the land surface the Bronze Age people would have worked and walked and lived on. And this started to show up features in it, such as post holes, stake holes, and a ditch. What was really exciting was that a few of the post holes actually still had the wooden stakes preserved in them, even over closer to the dry land area of the site. Although they weren't in the best state of preservation, it was still really cool to see it. And this was the first time that they had been seen since the Bronze Age. But what was also really interesting was when we started digging the ditch, there was actually evidence of stake holes at the bottom, suggesting there was some sort of fence there perhaps. And there was also a theory about a potential roundhouse in the trench that started to circulate, but sadly that one didn't turn out to be true. But by the end of the dig, our venturers had dug, recorded, and some had lifted in situ wooden post remains from over 52 post holes and 15 stake holes. Now, Trench 1 was pretty exciting, but Trench 2 also led to some interesting discoveries. This trench was located south of Trench 1, in another area near the suspected boundary of the wetland to the dry land. Trench 2 was opened on day 2 and had been cleaned back by day 4, revealing buried soil and what appeared to be some post holes and stake holes. Interestingly, a previous trench next to this one had identified a fence line, and it looked like we were possibly seeing a continuation of this. So we know these people liked their fences. By the end of the dig, the buried soil had been removed, and there was a possibility of the continuation of a fence and a few other pits and post holes that we'd found as well. We even found some flint flakes from tool working, perhaps the very tools the people were using to build their fence. Now we're going to take a look at our 3 test pits. We wanted to position all our test pits over different parts of the wooden platform so that we could get a good view of the preservation across the whole site. We did an auger survey to try and find the best place to put test pit 1. An auger survey is essentially where you drill very small holes down into the ground with something called an auger, and you look at what comes out to see what might be in the ground. Now this took us a few attempts because the wood at this part of the site was actually really deep. But true enough, the test pit turned out to be really deep too, and we found some amazingly preserved pieces of natural wood and even plant remains, but we didn't find the platform. So what was going on here? Was the platform smaller than we thought? Had it been built in segments? Or was it in a slightly different place over at this side of the site? These are all quite interesting questions. Over in Test Pit 2, which is where I spent most of my time on site, this gave us a bit of a surprise at first. when about a metre or so down we came across a plastic sheet, definitely not Bronze Age. It turned out we had actually come across one of Francis Pryor's previous excavations, and our candidate for star modern find, his watering can that we found just below the plastic sheet right in the middle of the test pit. Luckily for us, however, they had only excavated down so far in the 90s, and we continued on down and came across a number of new wooden upright posts, ending up with a total of 12 and a horizontal layer of wood too in this small little test pit. So much to see. But there was other interesting finds there as well. There was layers of sand and occasional quartz pebbles too. We maybe thought the sand was something that they people actually put down so that they wouldn't slip on the platform as they walked along it. But the quartz pebbles, we don't know. Maybe a ritual? But one thing about this test pit I'll never forget is being headfirst down a hole in the ground, digging out the bottom of a Bronze Age post to get the whole thing out intact and in one piece. And look at the result. Isn't it fantastic? You can actually see the original tool marks still on the bottom of the post. Test pit 3. Now this was interesting because as soon as we got to the depth of the waterlogged peat, the wood started to appear, and it wasn't quite in as good a condition as test pit 2 either. So questions started to arise about the preservation levels here, closer to the dry land boundary. Had there been more wood here originally, and as the water level had fallen, had the wood disappeared with it? So that's the trenches. Now they'd been fantastic and had given us a huge amount to think about. We had the very land surface that the Bronze Age people had walked on, that they were living on, where they'd been building their structures like their boundaries and fences. What animals were they trying to keep in or out? Or was it their neighbours they wanted to keep firmly on the other side of the fence? Then there's the amazing wooden causeway and platform. Test pit 2, with 12 posts and so much wood in such a small area. Clearly, this was a really impressive feat of engineering by the Bronze Age people. They knew how to build this thing. Test pit 1 showed that it's much more complex than we thought. The people who built it clearly knew what they were doing and positioned it according to their own needs. Maybe it was multiple structures in different places, or maybe it had another purpose that we're yet to discover. And what about the preservation, particularly in test pit 3, where the wood appeared as soon as the wet peat did? Are we starting to see Flag Fen drying out because of the draining of the fens, as we'd initially worried? Now, we've heard about the amazing archaeology, but what about the beginning of the venturer story? There was the opportunity to dig for the first ever time for some, including me, and to learn the process of digging, recording, geophysics, and wood preservation too. But it wasn't all just about the technical stuff. There were some really amazing fun activities on site as well. There were some reenactors, and there were some experimental archaeologists as well. One person came and he actually ran through a demonstration of how to forge a Bronze Age sword the way they would have done all those years ago. But not forgetting the amazing DVIP speakers we had in the evenings as well, Tony Robinson and Francis Pryor, amongst many others. But you could also spend time in the pub, by the fire, in the roundhouse, affectionately known as the Wattle and Daub. We had pub quizzes, and there was even an archaeological cake to celebrate International Bog Day. But just as importantly, DV did what it said and created a community for the archaeology on site and beyond. We had regular daily videos of what was happening on site and regular social media interaction. Everyone who was involved in the project became a part of a wider archaeological community in some way. So that's pretty much the end of my virtual tour. I hope you've enjoyed learning about Flag Fen. It's such an amazing site and still only 5% or so has been excavated. The discoveries here can show us how Bronze Age people lived and worked as a community, why they would build something like this, and how they adapted to their environment. The preservation of something as old and monumental as this, and made out of wood, is really unique and one of very few examples in the country. But more than that, it's a place that brings communities together. It brought them together across the wetland in the Bronze Age, and it's still important in bringing communities together today. 250 people supported the dig, and together we raised over £30,000. 120 people actually came to dig, and over 2,000 people came to visit on site when we were digging. Most importantly, it brought people together with a shared interest now to look after the site, to enjoy it, and to forge a community of their own, ultimately leading to the DigVentures community. There's plenty more work to be done at this site, and it's still drying out. So it's more important than ever to have a local community of people looking after it. So Flag Fen is an amazing site, and clearly people out there still think so too. Our dig has showed that and proved that, as the campaign was called, Flag Fen lives. So I hope you've enjoyed hearing a bit about Flag Fen, an introduction to it at least, and also a trip back to where DigVentures began and our first ever dig. Thanks for joining me on this virtual site tour of Flag Fen. If you love archaeology, check us out on digventures.com and keep an eye out for more virtual site tours and other videos that will be appearing soon. Thanks. It's very dirty work. As you can see, I'm incredibly dirty. It's really bad.